Echoes of the Cain-sibling rivalry, one of humanity's most potent archetypes. We shared the same womb, the same blood, and the same mother's lullabies, which made the sound of his neck snapping under my hands feel less like murder and more like a return to balance. Long before the soil swallowed his body, I learned that love and hatred are made of the exact same hunger. The only difference is that love asks to share the same plate, while hatred insists on eating alone. Some rivalries begin with a broken toy. Ours began with the quiet realization that there was only enough soul in our bloodline to animate one of us. Welcome to the Sovereign Renaissance, a channel through the arcane, mystical, and occult science. Across world mythologies, esoteric traditions, and depth psychology, sibling rivalry, carried to the point of death, is one of humanity's most potent archetypes. Spiritually, mortal fraternal conflict represents the clash of fundamental opposing forces, light and dark, order and chaos, spirit and matter, born from the same source where one aspect must perish or yield for a new spiritual order to emerge. The split self and shadow projection. At the psychological and spiritual level, siblings originate from the exact same root, lineage, and spiritual foundation. When rivalry turns lethal, it symbolizes a soul divided against itself. In Carl Jung's archetype of the shadow, the sibling becomes the physical projection of everything an individual rejects or envies in themselves. Because the sibling reflects the same origin, seeing them thrive or embody a missing trait creates an existential crisis. Destroying the sibling is a tragic, misguided attempt to annihilate one's own unresolved shadow, only to realize that killing the external mirror leaves an unfillable void within. Core spiritual themes across traditions: creation and foundation through fratricide. In ancient mythologies, the birth of a new world, religion, or empire frequently requires the mortal sacrifice of a twin or sibling. Cain and Abel, Abrahamic. The first death in human history occurs between brothers. It symbolizes the tragic transition from spiritual innocence to human free will, guilt, and moral accountability, as well as the clash between pastoral and agricultural modes of existence. Osiris and Seth, Egyptian. Seth's murder of his brother Osiris embodies entropy, drought, and chaos battling order and life. The death of Osiris leads directly to his ascension as ruler of the underworld and the spiritual evolution of his son Horus. Romulus and Remus, Roman. Romulus slaying Remus marks the bloody boundary line of civilization, illustrating the harsh law that sacred order often arises through the sacrifice of primordial unity. Key takeaway: mythologically, the fratricide marks the violent end of an old era and the painful birth of a new structural or spiritual order. The illusion of spiritual scarcity. Mortal sibling competition almost always stems from the perceived scarcity of grace, love, or inheritance. The belief that the blessing of the divine or parent is finite and can only belong to one. When Cain's sacrifice was rejected while Abel's was accepted, their rivalry arose not from hatred of Abel, but from Cain's fear of spiritual abandonment. The lethal turn in sibling rivalry illustrates the spiritual trap of mimetic desire, wanting something not for its intrinsic value, but simply because the other possesses it. Generational karmic culmination. In metaphysical and esoteric frameworks, extreme sibling rivalry is rarely just about the two individuals. It is the compression of ancestral karma, unresolved family dynamics, favoritism, unhealed ancestral trauma, and lineage curses gather weight across generations until they manifest as a catastrophic rupture between siblings. The death of a sibling through competition acts as a dark climax, forcing the survival lineage to either confront and heal its foundational wounds or fall into spiritual decay. Destructive dualism versus harmonious complementarity. In Near Eastern and European traditions, namely Egyptian, Greek, and Norse, sibling dynamics frequently present a zero-sum conflict. One brother represents life or order, while the other embodies death or chaos. One must triumph or perish. In contrast, Mesoamerican traditions like the Maya pole va feature twin pairs who represent complementary halves of a unified force. Hunahpu and Xabilanku do not fight each other. Instead, they used synchronized strategy and trickery together to conquer death itself, illustrating the power of allied duality over division. Direct fratricide versus proxy manipulation. While Egyptian myth features direct violence between Set and Osiris, Norse mythology introduces a more psychological dynamic. Loki acts as a shadow figure who manipulates Baldr's well-meaning blind brother into committing the murder. The rivalry operates through deceit, highlighting the Norse view that chaotic erosion often comes from within the family circle rather than direct combat. Cosmic inevitability versus moral choice. Greek sibling rivalries like Eteocles and Polynicles are bound to inescapable ancestral curses, the house of Oedipus, emphasizing tragic fate over individual control. Conversely, Egyptian myth uses the rivalry as an ongoing cyclical necessity. Set's chaos is essential to continuously challenge and test the divine order of Mayat, making the tension necessary for cosmic balance. Ancestral egregore and shadow displacement. A family unit operates as an egregore, a collective non-physical thought form fueled by shared beliefs, secrets, and emotional patterns. To maintain its stability, the family egregore often requires a balance of light and dark. Shadow dumping. Unresolved parental trauma, shame, and unexpressed rage don't vanish. They remain in the family's energetic field. The egregore often directs this dark mass into one particular child, the scapegoat. Energetic balance. Sibling rivalry is frequently the unconscious friction between the child holding the lineage's idealized facade, and the child bearing the lineage's unexamined shadow. The favored sibling unconsciously attacks the scapegoated sibling to keep the shadow contained away from themselves. Mimetic desire and soul teethering. In occult mechanics, proximity and shared blood creates an exceptionally thick ethereal cord between siblings. Because they share the same genetic and ancestral foundation, their energetic signatures vibrate at closely matched frequencies. This structural similarity triggers mimetic mirroring, identity parasitism. When siblings compete for the same archetype or role within the family matrix, their aura fields overlap. One sibling may attempt to absorb or siphon the other's vital force, natural talents, or charismatic weight to bolster their own standing. Reflective distortion. Because the etheric bond is so close, seeing the sibling is like looking into a living mirror of one's own suppressed faults or unfulfilled potential. The desire to conquer or diminish the sibling is often an unconscious attempt to obliterate an unwanted reflection of the self. Karmic, karmic reenactment and lineage debt. From a karmic standpoint, souls bound in intense sibling rivalry rarely meet for the first time in their current incarnation. The debt loop. Unresolved power dynamics, betrayals, or stolen inheritances from past life cycles frequently draw souls back into the same birth canal to settle the balance. Ancestral traps. If an ancestral line has a history of rivalry, such as brothers fighting over land, sisters competing for survival, or disinheritance, that pattern becomes encoded as a repeating script in the bloodline. Until a consciousness within the lineage steps back to break the ritual loop, successive generations will play out the exact same play with different actors. They always warned us that our bloodline carried a violent inheritance, but they were wrong about the math. It was never a curse passed down from parent to child. It was an arithmetic problem designed by a cruel universe that only ever left room for one. Standing over his body in the damp, turnip black soil, listening to the final, rattling gasp escape his throat, I felt no guilt, only the ice cold realization of what we truly were. We were never brothers. We were a pair of starving wolves born into a cage built for one. And as I dropped the spade onto his chest and turned towards the empty house, I knew the bitter truth. The moment you kill your twin to survive, you don't win the life they were denied. You just become the sole guardian of a grave you both dug the day you were born. And if you liked this video, please do like, share, and subscribe. And until next time, goodbye.